Hello and greetings from UB. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's webinar presentation. My name is Christy Fields and I lead the Alumni Lifelong Learning Program here at UB. And I'm also joined by my wonderful colleague, Joy Rona, who will assist in monitoring any questions. We are both so grateful you are able to join us today, and we hope you and your family are staying well. It is my honor to welcome today's featured presenter, Harold Starr, Clinical Associate Professor specializing in Operations Management and Strategy in the UB School of Management. Harold has been a management professor for more than 30 years and has been a consultant for more than 25 years. He has worked closely with hundreds of top executives, always offering hands-on advice drawn from both his experience and the academic world. In today's webinar, Harold will speak on how business certainly has changed during the pandemic, and some businesses are rebounding while others are still struggling. You will learn the steps to take now to navigate the economic recovery and position your business for the post-COVID world, whatever its shape. We will leave some time during today's webinar for Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and submit them through the GoToWebinar taskbar. There's a question section on your screen and you can chat those to us at any time. In addition, we will be recording today's session and we'll send you all a copy within the next 24 hours. With that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to our featured presenter, UB School of Management Clinical Professor, Harold Starr.
Thank you, Christy. Hello, everyone. I have been very careful, although unfortunately I do now see the number, and that's fine. When I told Christy I didn't want to know the nature, how big the audience was. I didn't want to know who was here. I'm sort of doing a shot in the dark. I don't know how many of you know me from prior exposures. We'll just take all of this by ear. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my slides. I think that now works. Christy, if it doesn't, please let me know. I'm going to push this up and go into slide mode. And I think by all indications, I'm ready to go. And the fact that I'm not hearing Christy calling to me suggests that perhaps I've got things correct after all.
You sure do.
I beg your pardon?
Sure do. Everything looks correct. Excellent.
Okay, we're good to go. All right. So first, to the old guy that watches lots and lots of streaming stuff, and IMDb does this to me when I watch a favorite Canadian comedy that goes back about 15, 20 years. They always put commercials on this thing. So I'm giving you a word from our sponsor, which is the Office of Professional and Executive Development. As you can see, there are a number of online certificate programs that are ready to be accessed. I believe at some point, either Christy and or perhaps Nicole will be making a link available in the chat box for you. I think I'm seeing that now in terms of there's a little flashing red light. A word of warning, I live on Zoom. I don't know GoToWebinar, and so occasionally you'll hear me getting befuddled, hopefully not too often, by the controls. I'm sort of relying upon my established or now established Zoom instincts to navigate this GoToWebinar platform. But anyway, I believe you should now have a link to, if you're interested in pursuing any of these programs, and I certainly encourage you to do so. I guess you'll discover, because I draw a reference to him in a couple of areas, but it's also generational, I suspect. It reveals, if you didn't already connect the dots by hearing that I've been at this business for over 30 years, Covey's 7 Habits is sort of influential in terms of the way I approach an awful lot of situations, and sharing that spirit with you, I'm basically beginning with the end in mind. And even from the generic description that I sent over to Christy, I found as I was putting this together over the past few days, I found myself, and informing this entire conversation, it's not just me sitting in isolation. Conversations within my network of friends have been focusing upon the matters that we're going to be discussing today, and this stuff has become very, very high in my mind, shall we say, in terms of people bouncing ideas. What do we do? And it means, from a candid standpoint, I must tell you, I have no crystal ball. So in so many of these areas, I'm in as much of the dark as you are right now. I'll, within that context, show you a different way, hopefully to be able to see and understand the strategic dilemma. And if I can do it properly, I make you recognize that we're actually looking at a couple of themes. It's not just one. It's not just a single set of issues, albeit as problematic as they are. There's deeper issues that are at play as well, and they make things even more vexing. So within the context, the first part will lay out the challenges that I suspect all of us in varying forms are experiencing. And again, please bear in mind, I created this with sort of a generic orientation. I don't know who's in the audience, so I didn't tailor the message, and this was very deliberate on my part. I didn't tailor it to aim at one particular direction or one particular industry or domain. It's pretty generic in that regard, but I will give you options that hopefully make your eyebrows go up just a tad, saying, okay, yes, I think those describe the situations that I'm facing or the choices that I'm facing in terms of how to handle the situation right now. And then because I'm the professor and because this is, after all, a session where I'm been invited and urged to share my 2 cents, I will offer you some broad counsel. And again, this is what I'm sharing with my friends. So you got to know if it's something that I'm sharing on the personal side. It's ideas that I believe in, because I'm accountable certainly to my friends for the advice that I give. As I said, I'm going to try and present this to you in a way that makes you sort of open your eyes and recognize the situation right now. I do say this as a strategy guy, as the professor, as the consultant, but really it's an issue of intellectual orientation as much as anything else. Everything that we teach, every idea you buy into, and the ideas that I'm referencing, you can get them from books, you can get them from seminars, you can get them from consultants, you can get them from your own wisdom. But everything that we have been preaching and counseling and teaching for the last, my discipline has been active for 40 years. Harvard was teaching strategy long before that. Everything has been predicated on the assumption that today is going to evolve into tomorrow with really just tiny, tiny, tiny changes. Or working it the other way, tomorrow is going to look just like today, albeit with perhaps minor increments. And it is a straightforward manner, at least relatively speaking, to adapt to those evolving circumstances. Nothing gets rewritten. You're able to plan because you make that assumption that tomorrow will be essentially like today. On the one hand, clearly COVID is what we call a discontinuity. It is something that disrupted the way your business, your organization fits within what, for lack of a better way to call it, the present environment. And these are the issues that, as I mentioned at the start, these are the issues that are dominating my conversations with my friends and the network that I work with. So of course, and there's really no surprises here. This, I think, to varying form, I may have inadvertently not included a particular problem area that is on your plate and perhaps very high on your radar. But whether it's economic in terms of inflation, or are we looking at a boom, or are we looking at some sort of crash, whether it's sociocultural in terms of how you handle the unprecedented divisions that we see right now, the politics we all know about, the business issues that I'm now confronting on a constant basis. This is what is in my short term. Everyone's chatting with me about the supply shortages that we both know as business people and as consumers, frankly. But whether it's lumber, I just read earlier in the week that the lumber prices are starting to fall back once again. So that circumstance may be resolving, but it'll take some time to play out. I managed to finagle a new vehicle, but certainly the microprocessor problem in that industry is an issue. People issues, we'll be talking quite a bit about those. But even bumping into things like dress pants and toilet paper, mundane things that are just in our personal consumptions. And I could have chosen any of 24 different items. I just chose those because They're certainly high in mind with the inventory of toilet paper that I built up, and my wife basically telling me, no, you can't buy any more. We're fine. We have enough to survive Armageddon. We're well stocked, and dress slacks. So that's predicated upon whether or not I'm going to be teaching in person or not. Like, all sorts of supply issues. The labor question is, of course, the one that I suspect is dominating your world. It's unquestionably dominating UB in terms of how they handle characters like me, but it's much more broad than that. And it's a whole nexus of issues that really, in a weekend gathering that I had with some very dear friends, this was the one that was high on the radar that consumed a good 2.5 hours of conversation. So it's very, very high. And then from what I've been reading on the finance side, depending upon the business that you're in, an awful lot of business people took an awful lot of debt on, and the financials are now looking, how on earth do you navigate this? How do you get out from underneath what you accumulated in order to just stay alive? The capital didn't just magically fall from the trees. It's now problematic, and I'm not sure what the solutions will be to them. So I'm going to give you a couple of ways to see this and to see the situation in terms, again, referring back to that framework of how strategy thinking is quietly predicated. And again, I'll refresh your memories. It's predicated upon the assumption that tomorrow is going to look just like today. Or if you want to take it into a slightly different way of speaking, COVID was something we could never predict, never. That's why we call it a discontinuity. It was something that just came upon us. One way of thinking then is, and this is the one that I had alluded to at the start when I said, let me open up your eyes to really the more deep considerations, that it's not just how we adapt to the present environment. What we're thinking about as well is the future environment. In other words, the relationship between today. And in my classes, I like to teach my students, think about it in terms of a world 5 years out. And we don't want, from a traditional strategic perspective, we don't want to be in a situation in 2026 where we say, oh shoot, if only we had thought of this back in 2021, how much better we would be today. So there is that picture of some future environment that I ask my students to project outwards. And the assumption in those class exercises, and I'll show you how we handle these types of situations later for executive situations, but the general assumptions are that tomorrow will reflect in some close way today. We can't make that assumption right now. We don't know if the long tomorrow, the 5-year out tomorrow, is going to reflect in any way or in some way. We don't know how it's going to look relative to today. And so you have, in effect, and this is the more deep theme that I had referenced at the start of this chat, we have the challenge of trying to resolve not one but two sets of uncertainties. Those that resolve, or those that are on our plates right now, and those that might appear, those that might become manifest and potentially might become very significant in that far future. In this, yes, I can. I hope you see my little arrow as I'm working with this. But the magic piece here is that if somehow some magic occurs here, some discontinuity, that we revert back to what was pre-COVID. That if this is a scenario that we're in, that all of the uncertainties that we're facing, all that are confronting us, challenging as they may be, somehow something will cause this old pre-COVID world to snap back into place. And really, in that case, in this orientation, it's a matter of just surviving for you right now. And I don't minimize the challenge, but it's a recognition that you're actually well positioned. What we were doing before will suit the very far future environment, and it's a matter of navigating the environment today. Ultimately, we have to recognize we don't know the when. We don't know when this situation snaps back, and we certainly don't know what the triggering discontinuity might be. We can speculate, but I just want you to recognize that I want you to be thinking in terms of two sets of time frames: the uncertainties you're working with now and the uncertainties associated with that far future. One way of seeing it is that this is the current situation, and that this current situation, the future, will look just like today. In other words, there is no magic discontinuity. For the foreseeable future and for all future orientation, for projections forward, for setting strategic paths, the future will look very, very similar to the nightmare scenario that we're now facing. And honestly, if you had to ask me as a betting person, and you should know, bet zero. I regard a 25-cent bet as a high stress moment, but the gut says that there's not going to be a magic discontinuity. And again, the discontinuity that I referenced before, I will allude to a couple of them. It might be that it's an economic recession. It might be, God help us, if there's some sort of terrorist situation. It could be cataclysmic. We could have a resurgence of COVID for all we know. I mean, the experts may be mistaken, and all of us that are now vaccinated, they could turn around and say, oops, sorry guys, it's back again. So there's all sorts of considerations that are plausible and possible. But the strategy guy in me says, no, I'm well trained in the orientation that tomorrow will look very similar to today, albeit plus or minus a small delta. So the idea that the present environment will evolve into the future environment, and that your current misfit will be a misfit in the future, this is a particularly vexing problem. This one is much more of a nightmare scenario than the magic scenario that says, no, the world will snap back. Some discontinuity will occur and the world will revert. This one says where we are now is really where we're going to be in, let's say, 5 years from now. And finally, we have the possibility that we have a double-barreled situation, that not only are we going to evolve, do we not fit now, and that there will be a discontinuity, but in this case, unlike the first situation, the world that emerges after a discontinuity is in itself so distorted and so different from the way things are right now that you're not only misfitting in the present circumstance, but you're misfitting into the future. And within this context, I can give you almost the pablum that says, yes, we need to be flexible in what we do today, bearing this in mind, but it still doesn't point you in a sufficiently concrete direction in terms of, okay, what do I do, buddy? You've laid out sort of a doom and gloom expectations that are necessary. Before I begin to sort of address this, so what do I do with this question? I do want to let you recognize how flummoxed we in my profession are by this. Ultimately, when I work with executives, we use the term residual uncertainties. It's a fancy academic term, but the whole idea is that we identify those factors that are essentially unpredictable, build scenarios around them, and then try to develop strategies that navigate the worlds where those uncertainties are either high or low. Put more simply, we use scenarios to handle situations where executives are confronting either or a range of futures that somehow may emerge, but we're not sure what they are. The problem is that even scenario planning assumes that uncertainties will persist over time. In other words, even in that type of thinking, we're never really comfortable, and we can't incorporate the idea that there will be a break between the current situation and the future, because this is fundamentally the unpredictable one. This is the one where we simply don't know what's coming. And honestly, this is the one which I suspect most closely describes the situation of, let's just simply say, a very, very large number of executives. That it's not just a matter, and this is the takeaway that I want you to have from this first part of my discussion with you. It's not just how do I navigate 2021, and even if I think about it, how do I navigate part of 2022? I really do want you thinking strategically of what's the world going to be looking like in 2025, 2026, bearing in mind that it's really just projections. But the uncertainties that we're facing are that right now, for executives in all businesses, none of us can make the assumption that tomorrow, i.e. 2026, will look anything like today, 2021. And that's the core challenge. We simply have uncertainty in that regard. So what on earth do you do? And really, I'll give you in the next two slides some generics. Because again, as I said at the outset, I don't have a crystal ball. And I don't have the level of arrogance to tell you how to proceed, given that I don't have a crystal ball. I have no correct connection to the forces that are going to bring about what tomorrow looks like. So the best we can all do is sort of stumble in the dark. I will, however, point out that you have a decision to make about the posture that you want to bring to the table. And there are really three different orientations that you can take to confront this level of uncertainty that is the business world right now. You can take the orientation of shaping the future. In other words, yours is the effort to try to influence what the future that emerges looks like. You also can take under that type of orientation an approach that says, I'm going to try and impact the when. In other words, influence the timing of when that future occurs. You can either make it, in other words, make a future that you want to happen. You can delay the emergence of that dreaded future. And there are plenty of examples in the real business world where these situations have been adopted, where both have been taken, where you try to delay it, you invest in the current situation as best as you possibly can, or you try and make that future happen and become a crystallizing agent. A second orientation calls upon you to be very adaptive. Basically, you become, I guess you could call it in a sense, although it's misapplied, but you can call it a fast follower. In other words, you're going to follow the changes very, very closely, and you're going to ride those waves, making the necessary adaptations all along the way. So in conversations I've been having, yes, of course, you need speed, you need agility, and you must be monitoring things very, very closely. My caution to those that are interested in this line of thinking, though, is you need to know what you're looking for. That there need to be markers that you're looking to see. You know, the worst, just to bring it back to the slides I showed before, the worst scenario would be that a discontinuity occurs, but it was off your radar, that you missed something significant, impactful to the emergence of the future, but you were looking in the wrong direction, or you just simply never considered it. So adapting to the future, while it makes sense, as do all three of these, by the way, but while it makes sense, it does require that you become, that you at least be alert to what you're looking for. You can't just simply trust the old signals and signposts. The third is the most cautious of the three, the idea of staying on the sidelines. You're invested. You're putting monies into what keeps you a player in the business, in the game. You're not going anywhere, but you're delaying. You're avoiding anything premature in terms of making big jumps or big bets. And you only move when to you, and it's not that all the uncertainties are resolved, but when you go to bed that night saying, okay, I now have clarity. The uncertainty or two that were holding me back, those local matters have been resolved, and I now see that I need to do X. You may still have 15 other decisions to be making, but sitting on the sidelines and moving more cautiously, you can move as uncertainties resolve. And so you can move in a way that is more, for lack of a better way to phrase it, incremental. In addition to the postures, what I want you to recognize is that there's really three types of moves that you can make. Call them actions or sets of actions. They're big bets. And this one's probably the most challenging for you. And I'll simply digress for a very quick moment on a personal story. For a good 30 years now, a research question that I've never seen really addressed, and at one point it had me in the basement of grocery stores sifting through invoices from, believe it or not, potato chip makers. And I can give you the whole story afterwards, if you're so inclined to how all that happened. But the question I was trying to resolve is, at the time of an economic recession, is it advantageous to retrench? In other words, wait for the conditions to change? Or do you seize the opportunity and move forward with aggressiveness? Ultimately, that's what a big bet is. Heroes and villains come from this. You can be hailed as the most prescient of executives, or you can be vilified as the most evil and vile of villains who bet the farm on this at a time when caution was in order. But big bets, whether it's in the form of new acquisitions, whether it's in the form of starting big capital programs, that constitutes the high risk, high return type of actions. Ideally, you look for options, those that will give you big payoffs and if things are going well, minimal losses if things don't go very well. So if anything, you're looking to build an initial investment and throw in some options that you can ramp up on it later, scale back on it. You can do plant trials, joint ventures within this. I'm not sure, for whatever reason, I'll just mention this as an aside, I'm not sure that this type of consideration, if we're in such an uncertain environment, that options are not necessarily a great path. Though if you can find them, I suspect that they'd be terrific, but I'm not really sure about making any type of partner commitments when you don't even know if the partners that you work with, for example, are going to survive this situation. The third category of actions is what is labeled here the no regrets moves. They'll pay off no matter what happens. And those are the easy ones, the ones that are the most logical to be making. As I said, the third piece is me offering my proverbial 2 cents here. In terms of the way I counsel people within my network, I genuinely believe that the uncertainties right now are of the type that, especially when I'm looking 5 years out, I have no idea what's coming. I can't figure out what's coming 60 days from now. And if I can't project out 60 days, then to make the assumption that 5 years from now is going to look like what emerges in 60 days, that's a really tough lift for me to be making. So I tend to be an invested on the sidelines type of guy who looks for a whole bunch of no regrets moves. You also have to take with very much a grain of salt. It's certainly my personal style. It reflects in my career choice, the idea that I don't have to confront the world. I can try to outsmart it if I possibly can. And that goes back to my poker playing days of my early 20s. And that observation, by the way, wasn't mine. It was a friend David's. And I sort of internalized it because I always thought he was right about this. But I tend to be kind of risk averse. There's no question about it. I'm not big, bold, and courageous in major decisions. But it's also candidly a part of professional responsibility. I could never stand here or sit as that's obviously a figure of speech, but I couldn't present to you. I couldn't tell you, go big bet, seize the day, grab the future, then walk away, wash my hands of any consequence as a result of you following that counsel. I couldn't do that professionally. So those that know me, and again, I very deliberately did not want to know who was in the session. I didn't want to know how many. So I'll make an assumption that a couple of you know me and know that I tend to be very much a business model type of guy. I don't know how many of you have seen me present business models in this manner, but this is the way I describe all businesses. This is the generic. I have philosophical depth to this in terms of calling these the essentials of business in contrast to a variety of attributes. So to me, when I say do no regrets moves, what I'm essentially saying to you is there's a whole host of issues that can rise to the very top of your radar. And in a sense, I'm saying, look, focus on the business, whether we call it, and again, in the Covey context, he calls it the circle of influence. For a long, long time, I've called it the certainty envelope. But stay within the areas that you can, as best as possible, control. The problem is for you, and this is not somehow detached from your reality, it is that you need to adapt your current practices. You need to adopt some new ideas and some new approaches, because the uncertainties that we're now looking at today are very, very real. They're very troublesome. To me, we're looking at two sets of priorities, and there's questions that you have to have on your radar now. And I guess one of the virtues of being, shall we say, not young, we won't use the O word to describe me, we'll simply call me not young. I have seen a few recessions. I have seen and worked with a number of executives who've navigated issues economic uncertainty. Let's just simply narrow it that way. And one of the sets of instructors that I've had over the years that taught me about the formation of the business model and the idea of including customers not just as part of the business model, but indeed as the most important piece, is at times of uncertainty, retaining your customers is fundamental. It becomes, if it's always a strategic priority, if it's always the starting point of everything strategic, to me, the environment that we're in now underscores that. And so it's, can you hold them? Will they continue to purchase from you both now and into that future world? And are they even going to survive? Just go to the Boulevard Mall, go to any of the local malls, look around and see the decimation that comes. One of the grand losses, a very good friend of mine works, a couple of them work at the Buffalo News. The decimation, it's not that just the digital consideration. Their advertisers simply have disappeared. They've gone under, and they can't come up. They can adapt to the technology. In some ways, that's sort of quote unquote easy to do. Weathering the loss of the customers is the strategic thrust that really cuts deep into the bone. And ultimately, will customers wait for you? Will they indulge you? Remember, you're experiencing your own sets of supply constraints. You're experiencing your own challenges in terms of people. Are they willing to cut you some slack, or will they simply cast you aside for some newcomer? And I've been party to many conversations, and I'll share the consequence of that on the next slide, but I've been party to many conversations with executives confronting exactly this last bullet, that will they play nice with us? Will they indulge us as we're suffering our supply constraints? What on earth are they going to do? Are they going to dump us? Ultimately, resources, how you create that value proposition. You make a promise to the customer, and you're only as good as your ability to deliver that promise. So really, how you navigate, and I have no magic wand, by the way. For scarcity in resources, I can't find you needed supplies. There's not a way in the world I can promise that, nor can I give you magic strategies to handle the inflation that I fear, as basically the image that at year's end will have, unfortunately, high levels of inflation. I am very much old enough to remember the inflation of the 70s and an era when I was still in Canada, where the government bonds backed by the Ottawa federal government were being issued with 22% interest rates. I mean, when it was just in utter chaos economically. I'm afraid that may be coming, and I have no magic wand for that one. But resources, ultimately, certainly your people, I can help you, at least in terms of thinking address, but recognize that you've got resource issues that are going to be particularly vexing. This is the gist of my recommendation to you, and it's one of the thrusts that in my network I have been advocating and pushing very aggressively. Really, there's two different types of relationships that you're going to enter into, whether it's with your people, whether it's with your vendors, whether it's with your customers. Really, it falls into whether your relationships are transactional or relational. Do they see everything in arm's length, short-term deals? It's just paper that crosses the table? Or is it, no, we're in this mess together and let's try to figure it out? And no, I'm not a huggy type. Those that know me know I'm not, let's sit by the campfire, roast some marshmallows and have, sing kumbaya. That's not it at all. But the idea that we're all facing this confrontation and that somehow we need to be working a strategy collectively to pull through this, that's what I'm referring to with the relationships. And as you can see in the red text, I'm suggesting that even though it may not be the norm for you, even though you may, for example, have business dealings with customers where they literally pass in front of you and proverbially speaking, they are buying a cup of coffee from you and the entire transaction lasts all of 30 seconds as it gets poured, money is exchanged, and we're done. You live that world potentially. And I'm suggesting still a relational mindset is what is necessary to navigate this current environment. Everybody needs to be treated as a partner, even the one who simply buys that cup of coffee. And so thinking long term, there's so many different ways that this can play itself out, but it could play out. It's simply a matter, use the scenario of the coffee vendor once again, that instructing your people to the car, think of a Tim Hortons. I guess when I have the image in mind, I'm thinking of the line of people lined up waiting for Tim Hortons. And now that the restrictions have been lifted, I expect that Tim Hortons as a business will once again see robust business, if ever it tailed off in terms of their drive-throughs. But in a relational mindset, even if you have the input, the orientation of throughput, and let's move as many people as we possibly can through the line, I'm stepping into the radical idea of having those people at the cashier engaging for an extra 30 seconds just to talk to people, just to give them the moment, because you've got to hold those customers. They've got to want to come back and to see you as somehow a little island or an oasis. I use the phrase bank of favors. And again, there's no illusion. I mentioned that I had learned these lessons from executives through one of the recessions that I lived through, or actually this was post that particular recession. We were already in the late 80s and times were booming. But the executive that I was with, I was party to that individual's conversations with one of his vendors. And ultimately, what he shared with me was I only heard his side of the conversation, but he was back and forth. And he said he had struck this deal with the vendor. And as you can see, the phrasing is with a sunset. He taught me this as well, but he said, look, I let my suppliers know that their price is out of whack. I tell them, I'm going to indulge you for a short period of time. I'll give you the business, even though it hurts my immediate margin. But we've done business together for, as I recall, the example he shared with me was about 10 to 15 years. And he said, I'm going to do business with you, but you've got to resolve your problem by year's end because I can't sustain you forever. I can't cover you or carry your inefficiencies, your problems. And that's the root of what I'm suggesting to you as a bank of favors. The idea, I'm doing you a favor and I'm letting you know about this, but I expect that you're going to, at some point down the pike, give me that indulgence as well. So I'll indulge performance mistakes from you. I'll eat, as I said, I'll eat margin. Ultimately, this isn't altruistic. Do the favors with them so that they'll do the favors with you. And that's the only way that I can see you resolving your immediate uncertainties in terms of supply issues, in terms of pricing issues. If you're in a do favors for each other mode and everybody is explicit about this, that's at least a path to weathering the inflation, the supply shortages, the missed deliveries, the potentially the quality problems caused by your people issues. And now let's get to this one. This one, what I'm hearing now, and as I said, 2.5 hours on my weekend gathering with my friends, this is the one that dominates from what I'm hearing in my network, not just my good friends. I'm hearing this over and over. A couple of its manifestations. Older employees are showing a tremendous willingness to retire right now. People are basically saying my financial future is set. I've been working because of either loyalty or personal enjoyment or whatever else. But if you impose this, if you tell me I have to go back, I may simply tell you I'm out. And now you have the challenge of replacing me. And over the years, I've been bumping into a lot of executives to whom that issue of, do you have successors in place? Can you exit the business and hand it over with a degree of confidence to people beneath you? It's hard to know if this is truly unique to the modern era or if this is just characteristic of businesses across time. But that message I've been hearing for years is, no, I don't have the talent in place yet. I'd love to leave, but I don't have the people to replace the key myself, let alone others. Well, in today's world, that problem seems to be exacerbated. The looming specter of executives who are about to lose key people is very, very daunting. I'm hearing that younger people, having experienced life in a more slow pace, are basically saying, no, it will work. There's no issues of that, but I'm not willing to make those commitments to you. I liked being home, and in fact, I'm constrained and must be home. I've got kids. We have health, childcare considerations. I simply can't give you the level of commitment that I was able to do pre-COVID. I can't give you that burn the candle at both ends type of loyalty. Taken to its extreme, and I suspect that this is pretty much a universal. I don't say any one business or any one sector has this as a problem. A lot of senior management, and the assumption as I was putting this set of slides together today is that senior management is who I'm talking to right now. You guys tend to be my audience. That senior managers want everything to go back to what was. You know, the announcements are widespread that we're going to go back now that the office restrictions have been lifted. I just heard this morning that apparently we can all go attend a Buffalo Bills game, that they'll be able to operate at 100% capacity now that the crisis really does appear to be over. We're all going back to the offices, and won't that just be wonderful? And what has been shared with me over and over is that top management that does this tends to look out of touch and arbitrary, because it's assuming, and even if this is delivered with all of most noble of intentions, with just sincerity that says, thank heavens this is all past, we can now go back to normal. As I said, the future, you know, we're dealing with two different futures, or we're dealing with two sets of discontinuities, and the present is not necessarily what was. You can't assume that everybody shares with you that desire to go back. And again, it's the older, the younger, but from a personnel standpoint, it's problematic. And so to me, relational thinking, again, this is conversational material that I've been having, and this is a little bit more of a stretch. I'm not an HR guy. I'm just someone who's been in the business that I do for a long, long time. So I'm certainly familiar with an awful lot of people that I have taught that have become your employees. And I've been at this long enough that my former students are now quite senior. So I have at least a pulse, not on the labor pool, but certainly on a piece of the labor pool that I've touched and that I've worked with. And so to me, this idea of relational thinking, still, as long as you can do it, and again, that 2.5-hour conversation, a couple of my friends were basically saying, Star, your ideas are fine, but we can't do this. And candidly, I didn't relent. I didn't pull back. I continued to push quite aggressively, and we'll see if my friends are able to even implement pieces or little nuggets of what I was counseling. But certainly this is an opportunity, and I really think I will paraphrase a politician, something that I very, very rarely do, but it's an interesting mindset for us here today. Yes, we are in, I don't use the term crisis, he does, but it's certainly a pool of very, very deep and vexing uncertainties. And I would suggest that you not waste this, that it's not just a matter of figuring out how to adapt to it, but it's a matter of becoming a little bit more proactive here. So the relational thinking that I counsel, certainly for customers and vendors, I would also suggest applies here to your own people. So partner with people. This is the chance to rethink jobs and how well they're done. And in fact, that's a chance again with the favors bank. People, if they're looking for more hybrid type of work environments, if they're looking for different sets of responsibilities, different reporting relationships, all of this is now not just a threat and a problem, but it is an opportunity. And while I don't think of it in terms of a negotiating tactic, just this idea that, okay, we're going to rethink things. But again, that favors bank can certainly work with the labor pool, with your employees, just as much as it can with outside vendors. I have heard so many described situations. I mean, this has been the subject of far too many conversations to count, but here's the opportunity now in this transition as we're trying to figure out just what the present looks like, moving people out of jobs in areas where they're simply not well suited. And I'm very aware for an awful lot of organizations that may mean moving an awful lot of people. I don't want to say, I'm never saying, when I say clean house, I'm not saying fire people. I'm saying move people around. I'm seeing, the term is, we would call it right sizing when we're talking of taking people, changing the employee numbers. I guess call it right jobbing if you wanted to describe it that way. But executives have for a long, long time that I can see have worked with the idea of, okay, well, you'll see it when I get to the recruiting methods because it really does overlap. We've tended to put people into jobs where we hoped they would grow into them, where we hoped they had the capabilities to do so, and it hasn't worked for both parties. And so the image that I have here is a very harsh one, to be sure, but you've been trolling for fish and you're hoping to recruit fish, and you've been using a net that very, very widely picks up people that are not suited to what you're asking them to do. Here is the chance that you can now sort those issues out, and in the process, do well for your people. And one of the images that I have for this, and I didn't put it in the slide, and I regret it, and I was tweaking the slides even as much as 5 minutes beforehand, but one of the themes that I want everybody to recognize, to me, all of us, you, your people, just everyone has a right to go home at the end of the week, turn to their significant other and just say, was this a good week, yes or no? The whole purpose of our work bundled all those issues together. You want to feel, and your people want to feel they made a difference. They made a positive contribution, that work was something that they took some pride in. Oh no, there's no illusions. 95% of the work days may have been on mundane things that were not the earth-shattering considerations, but everyone should have the freedom and the right to say at the end of the week, I'm proud of what I did. I helped make a difference. I moved something, just a little tiny increment. If your people are not now in a position that they can do that, if you've put the wrong people in because your recruiting methods weren't right, now's the chance to move things around. Now's the time to reshuffle people, positions in the jobs in order to perhaps right job. And again, I didn't put that phrase in. But the final piece to this, and again, you can see the reflection as I was tweaking this, I should have bolded this particular point of rethink performance measures. But this idea, even if your HR department is howling because you're going to change, to me, how you measure performance, if you're going to change around the way people do their jobs, if you're going to change and move people into new locations, into new activities, how you measure their performance needs to be revisited as well. And so the bottom line to all of this is that working with your people in a more relational context, rather than whatever the defining rules have been to this point, this is an opportunity that you can actually position the enterprise in what I would regard as very much a very high flexibility, no regrets move. You can now position for whatever comes. Look, as I mentioned, or as one of the slides said, I don't believe I actually read that particular part of the slide, where in this world of uncertainty, hiding in the cave is just not an option. And you can see Star was busy adjusting here too. I'll clean this out. It isn't, I was cutting and pasting really 5 minutes before this, which is, I tell my students, never do this, never do this. Certainly indulging in cheesecake, good whiskey. I mean, you can't hide from this, but hopefully in what has been going on, what you're confronting, hopefully I've given you some food for thought, Christy, I turn it now to you. Thank you all for your time, your attention, and any questions or comments. I'm open to all of them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Harold. Really grateful for your time and all the information you have shared with us. We did put the link to the executive programs at UB School of Management in the chat. We'll put that out there once again as well for those of you who might have missed it, but that is in there. Harold, I want to go and just start with a question here. You were talking about some of the younger generation and some maybe more senior level and executive, just two different mindsets
Right.
with maybe going back to normal or a new normal. So this question here submitted, the hybrid model that you were talking about, do you think it would be adopted by both sets of parties? Or do you kind of see it being just a medium that says, okay, this will do, or will it be adopted and really appreciated by both parties?
Of the two parties, the ones that to me are calling for it the most are the younger. I've had countless conversations with people with young kids, and their general lament is you being senior management, you don't appreciate the childcare situation that we're confronting. And as we've adapted to it, we've adapted in the context of two parents alternating situations. We like the idea of one parent always being home for the children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're looking to see employers make this or give them an option to have this continue. The ones that tend to be the most resistant to it are the ones of my generation, that we need to be at workplace, and it tends to get wrapped or bundled into the phrases like, we like to build culture, and they tend to fictionalize what the culture was. We like to build cooperation, that this is where the ability to go from one office to the next, that this facilitates the work that we do. I'm honestly, when I hear it, I don't dismiss that, but the person that typically is espousing this often is least connected to that type of interaction amongst employees. And so they're the least capable of saying, yes, this is what we were before COVID. So to me, the short answer to the question, the bigger challenge, I think from adopting the hybrid structure, I really in my bones believe the younger employees, the up and comers, they're much more willing to embrace this. They would love this. The problem will be for senior management to sort of grit the collective teeth and say, okay, this is something that we're willing to indulge.
Excellent, thank you, fantastic. I know we are reaching the top of the hour here, so I do want to just take a few minutes in respect for everyone's time to thank Harold for spending time with us, sharing this. We did record this session, so if you'd like to go back, listen to it, share it within your organization and with your folks as well, you're going to receive a copy of the recording. It's going to come to your inbox tomorrow, so keep an eye on that so you can go rewatch at your leisure. Also just want to thank Harold on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management, a fantastic partner to work with. So we're so grateful again for your time. We do want you to save the date for next Wednesday, June 23rd. We're going to continue our Webinar Wednesday series. We're going to be joined by Raymond Danahofer. He's a UB alumnus and Associate Dean for Support Services for the Pathology and Anatomical Sciences Department at the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. So join us next Wednesday, June 23rd. We'll send you more information in tomorrow's follow-up email as well. And on our webpage, you can go ahead and always see an archive library of all of our past webinars, as well as our upcoming sessions as well. With that, I want to give this last minute or so to turn it back over to Harold for any closing remarks or pieces of advice he'd like to leave you with.
Ooh, this is ad-libbing. Honestly, the single message to those that are confronting these issues that I identified today is you're not alone with this. And I don't know how much you talk with your network about this, but my biggest counsel to you beyond, what I shared with you in this little webinar today, talk to your peers, talk to your network, see what people are doing. As I said, you have to know what to be watching for to see when uncertainties are resolving. And the biggest challenge that I think for that situation is that you're doing all of this alone, that you're not, you're just one pair of eyes, and you're probably a very busy pair of eyes at that. So to the more you can expand the network and just, whether it's once a week, and it doesn't matter if you do coffee, cheesecake, whiskey, go for a good steak dinner, whatever it is, just network with peers, network with, and even if it isn't your competitors, just network with executives who are watching the same sets of issues. What are they seeing? And then just look for yourself. Is this relevant? Does this make sense? As Starr would suggest, is it showing signs of breaking, and so now things are coming back to what was? Is this a further snapping and disconnecting what has been? Keep in mind, we speak in terms of predictable evolution or discontinuous change. And so you need to stay on top of that, hopefully with pairs of eyes that help you do so. That's what I got.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Harold. And I did have one more question just come through, and I think if we have a minute, I'll get to it because I've seen some of my network start business travel again. What do you see as the impact on business travel, going forward in the next handful of years?
In my network, business travel remains high. I'm seeing people that actually flew and they were the only people on the plane. I'm not seeing a curtailment of that, in part because, well, no, there's a lot of reasons, but I'm not seeing a curtailment of business travel. I'm not sure for those, I may need a little bit more context. Is this for someone whose livelihood depends upon travel, or is this from someone who wants to know the best practice in terms of how to meet with employees who are scattered across different locations? So if the questioner could just sort of clarify that.
Okay, it did come through. So just for example, for instance, consulting firms.
I don't see any change in the relation in the need to travel. I was expecting this in person. I have other engagements this summer, and the expectation is that now that things have lifted, you're going to get the real person, not someone through a Zoom situation. So if for consulting, I'm expecting, and in fact, another way around it, I know one good friend is both consulting and training, and he has been traveling consistently all through the past, certainly, my gosh, probably through most of the COVID period. The planes were flying, but they were flying largely empty. He was one who was continuing to fly. So
Sure, absolutely.
if you're taking someone who has a very limited exposure, I mean, the question's a great one. My depth of contact, so we're going on my gut much more than what many have told me. I've got a couple of people that have informed me of this, but it's still anecdotal. But anecdotally, travel still counts.
Sure, definitely. Well, Harold, thank you again for taking time with us. We're so grateful for all the information and the expertise that you were able to share with us today. Very
Thank
thankful for that. Thank you all for joining us. Take care, stay well, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye all.
you.